So I want to bring in Andre Perry, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a scholar in residence at American University, and the author of Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. And Annie Nova, personal finance reporter for CNBC. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for being here for this important discussion. Annie, let me start with you. For the people out there who are feeling a bit disappointed that only $10,000 or $20,000 are going to be wiped from their debt, there were some people asking for a lot more, and there were some people expecting zero. How did the Biden administration get to these numbers?
For sure. So the Biden administration was really struggling with what to come out with in terms of the student loan forgiveness plan. And that's why we haven't seen a decision sooner. You know, it's a year and a half into the presidency. There was a lot of pressure for them to come to a decision, but it was hard for the president to arrive at the right number. If you remember, during the 2020 Democratic primary, you had Biden's rivals to the left, Senator Elizabeth Warren, as well as Senator Bernie Sanders, coming out with much bolder plans to forgive student debt. Warren was calling for $50,000 in forgiveness for most borrowers, and Sanders was calling to erase all of the debt, all $1.7 trillion outstanding. And so as the months went on, Biden stuck to his campaign promise. He had come out in support of $10,000. He'd been pushed by Warren and Sanders to come out with his own plan, but he seemed really stuck on the number of $10,000. At the same time, he was under intense pressure from key players like Senator Chuck Schumer, as well as the NAACP, to go further than the $10,000. So it seems that in this final plan, he was able to say, I stuck to my campaign promise of $10,000, but I have heard this criticism, and I will go further by expanding the relief to $20,000 for those who'd received a Pell Grant. Pell Grants are aid that go to families that usually earn under $60,000 a year, undergraduate students. So for that population, they will get double the relief, $20,000.
Andre, there are people literally within every demographic who have student loans, including some people who are much older than you'd think would have student loans. But there is a disproportionate impact on people of color and women. Women of color, the hardest impact. So this goes a long way, or there is a long way to go before student debt is eliminated. But what does this change any of that? Does this change any of the gaps that you write about and that you think about that persist between women and men, between black and Hispanic people and white people in this country, and the debt that they carry and the wealth that they have?
Well, in terms of closing racial gaps, $10,000 of relief is negligible on closing the gap. $20,000 does a little damage. My colleague Carl Romer and I found that the more debt you eliminate, the more you close the racial wealth gap. But so by capping it at $125,000, what you're essentially doing is missing the many middle income and upper middle income people of color and women who are making high incomes and did everything they were told to do in terms of getting an education, but they have significantly less wealth. And so $125,000 looks different for many populations. And so this plan is simply going to miss those people who are maybe higher income, but much lower, but have much lower wealth.
Annie, that's an interesting point, and it does play to this whole moral hazard issue that is coming up, mostly from Republicans, but some Democrats, particularly in states where there are lower education levels, who feel that, wait a second, nobody forced you to get an education, and no one forced you to take a loan, and it's kind of your business if you weren't able to pay that back. And when you give $10,000 or $20,000 to these people who can't pay their loans back, what about all those people who didn't take on college debt or didn't go to college at all? What do they get for this?
Yeah, absolutely. My emails have been, coming in from borrowers saying, I paid off my debt 3 years ago, and now I'm cut out of this relief. Or, I found a way to work through college and I didn't have to take out loans because of that. And why are people getting this relief? And maybe I would have done things differently. At the same time, I think the advocates and experts I talked to said there was just increasing pressure on the government to make changes and respond to a system that was just so flawed. Prior to the pandemic, when the economy was in one of its healthiest periods in history, only half of student loan borrowers were even repaying their student loans. A whopping quarter were in delinquency or default. Another quarter had applied for temporary relief measures. Borrowers were really struggling to repay their loans, and a lot of the government's promises about its own programs have not been fulfilled. And so there was pressure for them to do something for the borrowers right now who are struggling with the debt.
Andre, let's talk about wealth creation for a second, because you and I have talked about this through the pandemic and the aid that was given to people. When it comes to minorities in this country, people of color, black people in particularly, there's been a major setback, right? They've been set back in some cases by hundreds of years from white wealth creation. So it is a recent phenomenon that there are black families with an ability to create wealth, hand it down to their children, pay for their college, and have enough for retirement. There's a structural issue here that needs to be saved. And during the Democratic presidential primaries, there were real discussions about putting money away for black children so that they could have a college education and not have debt. And you and I discussed that was actually meaningful. $50,000, targeted for someone at birth could actually start to change the wealth gap. Does this at least get us in the right direction? I know you said $10,000 is not much and $20,000 makes a bit of a mark.
Hopefully the political dominoes will start to fall on this, because we live in a knowledge economy, and higher education is as basic as primary and secondary school. But we're not asking parents to take out a loan to send their kid to elementary or high school. But we are doing it at the post-secondary level. And something that is severely missed in these arguments about unfairness is that we do need people to go to college. We are compelling people to go to college, and tuition has increased threefold over the last 30 years. And so, given that predicament, we almost have to provide some relief to stabilize an economy and to encourage an economy to stay competitive in a global stage. So in many cases, we make political choices for vulnerable populations. We provided bailouts to farmers. We provided bailouts to homeowners and even in married couples. In this economy, if we do not figure out a way to, one, bail out student borrowers and create a new system that eliminates the need for student loans in the first place, then we're not doing ourselves a service. Biden is just doing the retroactive work. He needs to look forward to creating a new higher ed system as well.
Thank you to both of you for joining me this morning. Dr. Andre Perry, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution, and Annie Nova, Personal Finance Reporter for CNBC.